This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome back to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam. I'm your host, and helping take our leadership to the next level is the one and only Richard Blackaby.
You're glad there's only one.
Yeah, one is plenty. You know, the world is...
One father-in-law is all you can handle.
You know, the world is plenty blessed with just the one. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
but, you know, that's the way it goes. So this week we want to look at, we've talked about in the past, you know, why leaders fail, and we've looked sort of at the negative side. And, you know, when you can learn so much more from a failure, but you tend to not be able to learn as much from success. And oftentimes it's even in the success that's actually when leaders stop being good leaders. They run into trouble actually when things are going well. So, you know, we like war analogies here, and because it provides such a clean vision of that's the problem, here's the solution, here's how we strategize and fix it and conquer. But when things are going well, it seems like it's a bit more nebulous. Like, okay, so what do we focus on? We're successful. So we're going to talk about that today. And so maybe let's just lay out sort of the issue with when things go so well.
Yeah, which you don't ever think of it as, boy, things have never been better. Boy, do I need to be careful now. You know, it's just the opposite. It's
you've been fighting in the trenches for so long, and you finally reached whatever that goal is, whether it's for your business, for your church, whatever metrics you're using to gauge success. You've reached it. And then what happens?
Yeah, and that's partly why I think we're always surprised when all of a sudden someone, maybe a prominent pastor, or maybe a prominent CEO, and then all of a sudden you discover that they've had a total brain freeze and committed adultery or embezzlement or done something foolish. And you think, well, what happened? Like for years, those guys were so good and you know, so admirable, and were just sort of a picture of good leadership. And then in their later years, all of a sudden they just do something foolish, and that's always been a puzzlement, I think, to a lot of people that maybe you admired for years and years, and they seem to always just instinctively do the right thing, and then suddenly in their older age, perhaps, they do something that just seems completely uncharacteristic to what they've done. And there's lots of certainly of examples of that. You know, of course, in the Bible, you can think of someone like David, that for years David does the right thing. He's noble. He inspires mighty men to follow him. He doesn't take shortcuts. He trusts God, even when everything's going against him and everyone wants to kill him. But his great sin happens once those battles are over.
Yeah.
He's in peacetime. And when his army goes out to battle, he stays home and is lounging around on his rooftop and notices this good-looking neighbor of his, Bathsheba, and the rest is kind of history. It's kind of like all those years when he was fighting battles and going up against the Philistines and giants.
On the run.
He does everything right, it seems. And then when he's at the peak, he messes up. And of course, Solomon, his son, a similar thing. When he starts out, he seems so wise. He asks for wisdom. He's making all these wise decisions, but then he starts marrying all these wives and building palaces for them to live in, and in his success and his wealth, then all of a sudden his heart turns from God. And so his heart doesn't turn from God when he's concerned about whether he'll even be made king or not, or whether his brother is going to usurp his throne. It's when everything is going great that his heart really messes up. And Hezekiah, another great king in the Bible, but it's after he is miraculously healed by God, and his life was supposed to come to an end. He's told to get your house in order. You're about to go to your maker. He has a come apart. He's all upset, and God grants him some more years of life. And then it's in his later years that it appears that he becomes prideful. The Babylonians send some envoys to say, hey, just want to congratulate you on your miraculous healing. And in his hubris, Hezekiah shows these messengers from Babylon all of his treasure. and the Babylonians are carefully taking an inventory of all the stuff there that they're going to come back and remove later. And Isaiah has to condemn him to say, you know, earlier on, it seemed like he always sought counsel and he always did the right thing, but later in life, again, King Uzziah, you know, he's famous for when he dies in Isaiah 6. Isaiah says in the year that King Uzziah died, and Isaiah has this great vision of God. But Uzziah for years was one of the finest leaders, one of the finest kings in Judah's history. He overhauls the army. He builds new towers for the walls. He actually even puts in new weaponry, modern cutting-edge weapons. He builds all kinds of the agriculture and the economy, and they've never had such success since Solomon's day. But in his peak of power and prestige, it goes to his head. And one day he decides he's going to offer incense in the temple, something only priests are supposed to do. And the priests are trying to stop him, and he gets upset. Do you not know who I am? I'm the king. And so then God strikes him with leprosy, and he scurries out of the temple at that point and spends the rest of his days in a leper's house. He can't even go back in his own palace. The greatest kings, really, some of the greatest kings in Israel's history start out well, but it's like they have a really difficult time handling their success. And so they handle adversity great. They're talking to God, praying, trusting him, writing psalms about him. But for some reason, there's just something about the human nature, I think, that we tend to handle adversity far better than success. And so I've always felt like that's the reason that God doesn't grant success to some people, because he just knows it would literally ruin them. They couldn't handle it. They'd become prideful. They'd boastful. They might not handle the wealth that might come with that, or the power, the influence. And so we want to just talk a little bit about, you know, if you're listening to this, you're probably saying, well, then God, do whatever you need to in me so I can handle success, because I want success. And so, you know, what do you do to keep your feet on the ground? That no matter how successful you are, at the end of the day, you walk away and you're still the same person, you know. And there's been lots and lots of studies of people, the difference between people that became famous CEOs. You know, some CEOs, when all of a sudden they got their crack at being the number one guy, they began to have all kinds of excessive demands. You know, I want 6 parking spaces right by the front door just for me. Not one, I want 6. And I want a private elevator that only I use, that takes me up to the top corner office. And then there's others like maybe Sam Walton, who owns the biggest retail store chain in the world, and he's driving his same pickup truck he has for years. And you think, well, why is that some guys, it doesn't matter how much money they've got or how much influence, they remain the same person. And they've got the money, they've got the power, they could easily do a lot more, be a lot more extravagant. But something keeps their feet on the ground, and for other people, they lose all their bearings. So let me mention a couple things. One is, obviously, it's just you need to keep meeting with God, I would say, every morning. Of course, when you don't know if you're even going to have a job, or if you can make payroll, or if you're going to get fired, your hostile takeover is going to, you know, take over your business and get you fired. Well, then it's pretty easy to pray a lot, to seek God. But when you are number one in your industry, when you pastor a mega church, when everybody thinks that you're God's gift to humanity, then you need to be meeting with God more than ever, because you're not, contrary to what you might think, you're not in the same league as God. And so every day you're meeting with someone far, far greater than you are. And that just kind of helps keep you in the proper perspective. The best way for you to see yourself clearly is to get a good look at God. When you've seen your Creator, then you have a better sense of what it means to be a creation. And then listen to Him. The Spirit of God is very good at sending out warnings, a dis-ease in your spirit that just alerts you that perhaps you're drifting, that your pride is creeping in. I'll tell you what, the Spirit of God is always alert to pride creeping into our life. And, you might get up and make a little speech and sit down, and the Spirit of God says, wow, that was sure a lot about you. You didn't even mention all of your employees that really did the grunt work to make this success happen. And, boy, that was a little prideful. You didn't have to tell that story. You didn't have to go on. And there's just ways, if you'll listen, the Spirit of God will alert you. This put off little warning bells ringing to tell you, pride is creeping in. Lust, greed, any number of things. You're starting to compare yourself. You're starting to think that you're really something special when really so much of your success has been the blessing of God, God's favor on your life. God could just as easily have blessed your competitor, could have easily just let that guy be the pastor of your church instead of you. The search committee just chose you. And, there's just lots of ways where the Spirit of God can alert you. Be careful because, I can't emphasize that enough. If you will just honestly, openly meet with God every morning, He knows. And He also knows if you're going to be in a place sometime that day where you'll be tempted to overreach yourself, where you may see a Bathsheba walking down the hallway, or you might just have people that just fan your ego and tell you what you want to hear. And so the Spirit of God has plenty of ways to alert you first thing in the morning. You're in trouble. You're going to face some dangers today, so be careful. A second one, I think, too, that comes not too far from a close second to that one, is listen to your spouse and kids. You and I both have had the blessing of marrying Canadians, and Canadians they don't tend to put people on pedestals. They tend to tell it like it is and not get starry-eyed. And I mean, sometimes that can be a fault. They want to bring everybody down to the same level. But on the flip side, though, I know full well that my wife, she loves me and she's proud of what God's done in my life, but she's not starry-eyed by any means, and she's not shy about telling me what she thinks. And I know full well that if she's in the audience and I start bragging about myself, I'll hear about it later. Or if I treat people disrespectfully, if I don't treat people as equals, if I look down on people, I know that she'll notice that. And I also trust my kids will notice that. And so, it's a good thing when I work with kids and kids-in-laws that I'm surrounded by people that have a relationship with me where they can say things and say, "Wow, Richard, you didn't sound like yourself today," or "You kind of that didn't. I'm not sure what was going on today, but that didn't sound very humble, or that didn't sound as God-centered as I know you like to be." And so I think there's just there's a lot of value in always having some people around you that have the freedom to tell you the truth. There's a great story. King Joash, at one point in Judah, he was a child. He was almost killed. His life was miraculously saved, and ultimately he becomes the king. But there was a wise chief priest, high priest, that took him under wing as a child, and guided him and counseled him, steered him in the right direction. And it says something kind of interesting about him. It says, as long as that priest lived, the king acted wisely. But eventually the priest dies of old age, and then the king just goes off the tracks, starts to persecute the very people of God that had done so much to help him become the king, and to forsake God and to be enticed by the trappings of power. And sometimes you can just see when oftentimes what happens is someone loses their chief counselor, their conscience or whatever, and then all of a sudden they just veer off course, and you trace it back and you realize, well, they had this VP that they talked to regularly that always kind of was a voice of reason, but when he moved on, all of a sudden that voice wasn't there anymore.
Yeah.
Or maybe they lost their wife or their husband, and all of a sudden they're not acting the same way. So one of the best ways, and you may not always like that voice, once you get to the top, sometimes you can kind of feel like, hey, do I really need to hear this anymore? Like I'm the top guy now, and do I still need to be hearing that I'm not that great?
Yeah.
But you do need to keep your feet on the ground, because leadership has its own temptations that can lure even some of what you would think would be some of the most down-to-earth people to places that you'd never think that they would go.
Yeah, if everybody around you is saying yes, then it's time to rethink your inner circle.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well, let's take a quick break here, and we'll look at some more when we come back. This fall, Blackaby Ministries is hosting 2 spiritual leadership coaching workshops. One in the Atlanta area and the other is fully online. The focus of these workshops are learning how to ask the right questions to help move people onto God's agenda. The online workshop is September 13th through the 15th, and the in-person workshop is October 21st through the 23rd. To find out more and to register, visit blackabycoaching.org. Links will be in the show notes. It's a little counterintuitive that it's in our success that we often find ourselves finding the most failure as leaders, but that's what we're looking at today, and we've looked at a few ways to sort of guard against that, and I think you've got a couple of more here as we wrap up this podcast.
Yeah, a third thing would be just stay in touch with your people. Just talk to the people. Walk the shop floor, listen to people. So what happens sometimes when you become the CEO, you become the senior pastor, is that oftentimes you get isolated from your people, and you're not hearing the grassroots anymore, the people that have the pulse speed of where things are at, what's going on. I think, again, Sam Walton's a great example. He used to show up at midnight in the room where all the Walmart truckers would have their lunch breaks, and he'd bring in a box of donuts and just sit down with the truckers and say, "What are you seeing? You're going to all the stores and so on, and what are you noticing?" And they felt like it helped him keep grounded and to know what mattered, and not to lose touch. It's always one of the biggest dangers of people in top leadership, is that they're accused of losing touch with the organization, the people that make it happen, the ground troops. Yeah,
and that's tough, because I think the higher up you go, the more insulated you become in an organization. You're just meeting with your direct reports, and then they're meeting with theirs, and you're so far removed from sort of the ground floor.
Yeah,
and
you end up with just that little group of direct reports, and if you're not careful, they'll all be just telling you what you want to hear.
Yeah, and if they're ambitious, they may just be telling you what you want to hear.
And kind of a similar thing is also just be talking to customers and clients, parishioners. Sometimes, again, what happens is there'll be these epic fails where some company will come out with some product and it's a complete flop, and you think, well, how did you think that this was going to be so successful when you were so wrong? Well, because they were talking among themselves. They'd not field tested it. They didn't know really what the customers wanted. There's sort of two different ways to do that in business. Some ways is you come up with a product, and then you try to convince people that they need the product. Yeah. The other way is go listen to people, to customers, and find out what they need. Find out what they keep asking for. If you just had this feature, it'd be so much better. I love the truck you make, but I wish that it did this or it had that. Well, then go, and now you know what to make. And so
I think Segway is a great example of just how they
brilliant
so
idea.
Wrong.
Just not what people were asking for that needed. And so keep a line of communication always with the people that you're dealing with, your customer, your client. Listen to them, talk to them. And kind of going with that, a fifth thing is just serve. Even when you're the CEO of maybe a Fortune 500 company or a pastor of a megachurch, I should be able to go up to you and say, where are you serving right now? What are you doing that's just ministering to other people? So when you serve other people, it just reminds you that you are a servant. You are a servant of God. And you're a servant of your people. You are there to serve in the organization. A sixth thing is just remember where you came from. You may be the top dog now, but you weren't always that. You came maybe from a humble background. my wife and I talk often of the fact that we both grew up basically poor. We grew up in very small homes, big families, no money. Neither of us, I can't really remember ever my parents just saying, let's just go out to eat at a restaurant somewhere. I mean, a restaurant to us was McDonald's if we were really, but I mean, there was no sit down, look at a menu kind of, I have no memory of that growing up because we just didn't have the money. But you know, we've also said we're okay with that. You know, we didn't have a lot of things others had, but it kind of reminds you I think it's good to remember where you came from.
Yeah.
You might have money now, you might have prestige now, but you know, that's you didn't have that. God kind of gave that to you. God can take it away. So just know that you're an ordinary person who's been blessed is what you are. You're not entitled. You didn't deserve to become a successful leader. God's blessed you. He's shown his favor. You might have just been lucky as well. And so just know that you were one of the fortunate ones that has had an opportunity to lead. And don't lose sight of that. A seventh thing is just keep a healthy sense of humor. You're always in danger when you can't handle laughing at yourself anymore or having other people tease you. You know, to me, that's always a good sign. If people feel free to tease me, then that kind of helps me have a sense that they still see my humanity. You know, they still see flaws and they feel free to point those out to me. And I think you need that. And when you can't laugh at yourself anymore, you're in danger. Yeah. And I've seen that. I've seen people that going up the ladder were really fun to be around, jokesters. People love to tease and banter. And then they become the CEO and they get real serious. It's like, okay, well, you've got to treat me with respect now because I'm this. And, you know, you just need to be careful with that. When you stop laughing at yourself, you may be in more danger than you realize.
For sure.
There's a great story, an eighth point, which is kind of going back to just surrounding yourself with people. But in the Roman Empire time, if you were a victorious general, you would have what they called a triumph, which was a victory parade, and you'd do it in Rome, and all of your soldiers would march in the streets, and they would be burning perfume and so on to celebrate, and they'd march all the prisoners, captives along that would be executed at the end of the parade, and they'd showcase the treasures that you had taken, the spoils, and then you'd be coming up in a chariot or some kind of vehicle. Everybody would be cheering you on. But oftentimes they had a person that was assigned to ride with you in the chariot or behind you, and they would be whispering in your ear. Basically, they'd be saying, remember, you're mortal. You're mortal. And what they were trying to say is, even though it's pretty hard not to get a big head here, the whole city of Rome is all out in the streets cheering you on and saying how wonderful you are. At the end of the day, remember, you're mortal. You're going to die like everybody else. You're vulnerable like everybody else. And so just don't let it go to your head. And I think in some ways, it's probably good for every leader to have some voice like that, just kind of gently reminding you, you're just mortal. You're just flesh and blood. You're vulnerable. Ninth thing, keep your eye on the mission. And if you're a leader, it's not about you. Your organization does not exist so that you can make a good living, so that you can become famous. You are the leader so that you can make your organization better. Your organization has a goal, has a mission, has a purpose. Hopefully it's to make the world better in some way by the product it provides or the services as a church or some other kind of organization. And what happens a lot of times is that leaders who get in trouble lose sight of the mission. Their mission is to make a stronger and stronger organization. Sometimes what happens, though, is the leader begins to think that the purpose of the organization is just to showcase them, to make them wealthy. And, of course, that happens when leaders pay themselves exorbitant salaries, even to the detriment of the company. You know, there's times where the company has lost millions of dollars, but then it's still giving their CEO a massive bonus in a year of loss, and to say, well, wait a minute, your job was to make profits. You suffered a huge loss, and yet you're still enriching yourself. It's are you putting the organization before yourself? And so, one of the ways to keep your feet on the ground is to say, I'm here to make my organization better. I remember years ago, there's a famous story. I think it was about a baseball player. One year, he had a great year batting and hitting, and so he expected to get a huge increase in pay. And when they offered him not nearly as much as he thought, he came in and was very upset and said, "I deserve a lot more than that." And they said, "Well, what place did we come in this year?" Well, they came in last place in their division. They said, "Well, we can come in last place without you." It's like you don't exist. He obviously had performed well, but he hadn't been able to carry the team to victory. And the whole point of being on a team is to help the team be successful,
Right.
not individual success. And sometimes as leaders, we forget that we are on the team to make the team success,
Yeah.
not ourselves success.
Well,
So,
and I think when the team is successful, I think it's easy to sort of just get a little complacent and think that, well, we've did the thing we set out to do, and I think that's where you can kind of get distracted and
Yeah.
start thinking, well, now that we've done that, like maybe I can make a few more bucks, or I'm a bit more special than I should be, or,
Yeah.
or whatever. So,
well, and after a victory, you let your guard down. You
Yeah.
think, okay, now it's okay. We're not at high risk here, and that's a 10th thing. It's just, I think, just to recognize that you are at risk, and that you actually have increased risk the more successful you are. The temptations become greater. I think even Satan and sin and temptations become greater. There's more available to you. There's
Yeah.
more people who want your job. There's more people who want you to fail. There's more competitors who are doing anything to try to bring you down.
Yeah. Well, I think the higher up you get, the more damage you can cause
Yeah.
by a failure. Like if you're entry level, maybe nobody notices that you had a failure.
Yeah.
It's not to say that you're not important, but then when you're leading the company, and you have a failure like that, way more lives I feel like are impacted, both directly and indirectly.
Yeah, that's true. And I maybe just the last thing, the 11th thing to say is just keep an eye on your legacy. Think about how you will be remembered. And sadly, there's people who've served maybe faithfully for 25 years in an organization, but what they're remembered for is their spectacular downfall
Yeah.
in year 26. And, and that's typically what people remember is your failure. Of course, David and Bathsheba, like that was a bad year in his life.
Yeah.
But he paid the price for that the rest of his life and his reign. And it kind of overshadowed so many years of faithful trusting in God and obedience. It's a spectacular fail. But really, over the course of a long life, you can only find just a very small handful of mistakes that he made. But they were big ones.
Yeah.
And so, and they tarnished his career, his reputation ever after. And so, sometimes you think about how you will finish well,
Yeah.
how you'll be remembered because you didn't just start well, you didn't work your way up the ladder well, but you handled being at the top well. And oftentimes that means that at some point you'll graciously step down as well. You'll retire, you'll move on, you'll let your successor take over. And you, from start to finish, you can be a model that can be inspirational and a blessing to others. And so sometimes I think if you just keep thinking about how is this going to look, how will this reflect on my family, on my God, on my company, I need to be very careful because I'm in some dangerous waters here, and I want to finish the race. I want to cross the finish line and still be behaving and leading in a way that brings glory to God and honors the organization that I've led.
Yeah, keeping that perspective I think is key, and I think that's why, doing things that maybe you're not good at can help you sort of remind you that you're that you are just mortal and human. And so, well, this has been good, Richard, and I appreciate you taking the time. And I think it's something we don't often think about is how do we handle that success, and that can be more dangerous to us than even a failure.
Yeah.
And so appreciate you taking the time, and until next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.